think that should be happening in just a second. Okay. All right. Yes, we are live. Hello, YouTube. Oh, my goodness. It's good to be back with you all while in the studio because, as you all could tell, while I was traveling and out doing my social justice thing, it's kind of hard to be all the places that I need to be. So, hi. Hope everybody's doing well. Urban View. All right. We are good to go. Awesome. 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 We got a lot to talk about today because Urban View and I have a date. We got a hot date. So immediately following this live, Urban View and I are going to be having a community conversation. And that community conversation is going to be one where people who were alive before 1964, when the 1964 Civil Rights Act was passed, are going to be calling in at 866-801-8255 to give us advice, right? You know, we young bloods out here. Like, we act like we know a whole lot of things, but we were reading Black Power, The Politics of Black Liberation by Kwame Ture, and I can't remember the name of the other author. I want to say Charles Hamilton, but don't quote me on that. But in the book, I remember as I was reading this book, because it was a part of a book club, I remember coming across passage after passage after passage of this book, which was written in the 1960s, of things that they had done and arguments that they had made that when I was coming up in the early 2000s, you know, late 99s, 2000s, I thought we were doing original shit. Like, I thought the arguments we were making were like original arguments. And like, it was very humbling to read that book and realize, holy crap, they did that too? Or, oh snap, they had already talked about this and debated these things that me and my contemporaries had been arguing and debating about. I was like, had we known they had already done this and had these conversations, I would not have thought, one, that I was as smart as I was making all these highly intellectual arguments, because I would have realized these arguments have been made before. And so we want to hear from our elders this morning at 866-801-8255. 866-801-TALK once we finish this live, because we want to know, what was life like prior to 1964? Like, we know what it is intellectually, but it's a different thing. As I was saying to the Urban View audience, the only time I've seen signs that say no dogs, no N-words allowed has been in museums. I've never been in a situation where seeing that sign meant I can't go in the store, right? Like, I've never been in a situation where seeing a sign that said colored this, white that, meant that I had to choose appropriately which one, and otherwise that there would be consequences. I've seen that stuff in films or in documentaries like Eyes on the Prize. So today's call-in is going to be very important, because we are wandering around thinking we're having new arguments and new conversations when, frankly, we're just repeating old stuff. I actually have just brought into our office an OG elder, like an OG civil rights attorney, because I realized, like, we're having all these civil rights conversations as young attorneys and as young organizers, but we need some OGs in this space. So shout out to the OG who I did not get permission to say their names, so I'm not going to in this moment. Frankly, it's probably better that I don't anyway. But you got to be surrounded by some OGs, and so that's what we're going to do in today's conversation, or in the conversation that will follow today's live. Now, I want to get to the news today, but I want to start by looking at the Bible. We'll look at the Bible, one particular passage of the Bible. And actually, in a couple of days, we have this video clip that I've been sitting on for a little while that walks us through all of the different changes that have been made to the Bible. I know that's going to blow some people's mind. I haven't incorporated that yet, but we will. But we're going to look at the Bible. And one of the parts that is still considered part of the Bible, because a lot of you who are biblical scholars, you know that one of the things that's been happening is whole passages and Bible verses have been removed from various biblical texts, because now with additional research, we know that they was never supposed to be a part of the Bible at all. They weren't even a part of the passages that they were lifted from or copied from or plagiarized from. So that's happening. But in one of the portions of the Bible that is still considered part of the Bible, I know I just blew somebody's mind with that part, but there's this passage that talks about judging. And the passage is designed to say that you should not judge, because the way that you judge other people, you are going to be judged similarly. And the passage literally says, it's coming out of Matthew. I believe this is Matthew chapter 7. But they said, don't judge or you too will be judged. And in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure that you use, it will be measured to you. And then they go into this weird story about a speck of dust and a plank of wood. And the idea is that let's say I'm the one judging you, right? And I'm judging you. I got this big old, like, branch sticking out my eye. Like, I got a whole ass branch popped in my eye. I don't know why the branch is in my eye. It's a tree branch. It's just in my eye. And it's obvious to everybody that I got a whole ass piece of tree sticking out my eyeball that I should probably do something about. But the story goes on to say that the person with this whole ass piece of wood sticking out their eye is trying to tell you, hey man, I see some dust in your eye. You know, you got specks of dust in your eye. Like, you want me to fix that for you? Because I see, like, it's like a whole little piece of dust that just flew down and landed on your eyelash. I could blow it out for you. I got some Visine drops. I got some eye drops. You want to cleanse your eye with that? Because you got a whole ass speck of dust in your eye. And the parable is designed to say, why are you in it? Like, why are you with this big ass tree branch in your eye? Why are you worried about this other person who has a speck of dust in their eye? Why you don't worry about getting that tree branch out your eye? And amen, why you got a whole ass tree branch in your eye anyway? That's how I imagine the story was being told when Jesus was talking about it. But the idea is that why are you looking at the speck of dust in your brother or sister or family member's eye and pay no attention to the tree branch in your own eye? How can you say to someone, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there is a tree branch in your own? You hypocrite! First, take the tree branch out your own eye, and then you will be able to clearly see how to take the speck from your brother's eye. Now, if I were Jesus, I would have added some things like, and frankly, friend, if you got a whole ass tree branch coming out your eye, why are you worried about that other person? Probably the fact that they only have a speck of dust means that they could be telling you some things. This is a conversation about Texas and Chicago. This is a conversation about Texas and Chicago, because Texas right now, you got a big ass tree branch in your own eye, and you looking at Chicago like y'all got some wisdom. And I don't mean y'all Texas, I mean y'all's leadership. Y'all's leadership is looking at Chicago like y'all got some wisdom Chicago needs, and you acting like they should be learning from you. Chicago got a speck in their eye. You got a whole ass tree branch in your eye. Now, we done already talked about the fact that in the state of Texas, Greg Abbott and the Republicans, there are a lot of things you should be worried about. You should be worried about the fact that your state, the state of Texas, is now number one, if not number two. Y'all go back and forth between y'all and Florida for the greatest number of people who are financially distressed. Y'all's bankruptcy filings are increasing. Your consumer credit defaults are on the rise. Y'all got whole ass data centers that are gobbling up energy, so much so that like it is competing with the actual citizens of your state as it pertains to who's going to be able to drink the most water. And in fact, the Economic Times has this really powerful article that's called Texas AI Centers Guzzle 463 million gallons. Now residents are asked to cut back on showers. So meanwhile, while y'all's governor is trying to tell Chicago how to handle their business, y'all getting played like some suckers by some thirsty ass billionaires whose computers are literally sucking up all your water. And there are a whole bunch of other Republican states that I have notes for about this. Alaska, you was going to catch some of this as well, because in Alaska, and we'll have to talk about this again another day, I don't want to spend too much time on it right now, but in Alaska, they basically should be preparing for some similar assessment, because y'all just had an approval that Donald Trump, he just issued an approval that basically there's going to be a construction of a 211-mile highway that's going right through your foothills and is going to have a horrific impact on the environment. But hey, AI data centers need capacity, and this, according to Donald Trump, is going to give the United States an advantage in the AI wars. At some point, we're going to have to talk about the fact that artificial intelligence might be the next housing bubble. I know people don't like to have that conversation, but we should have that conversation, because it's too many things pressing on that industry for allow it to be viable in the ways that they're thinking about. But we'll talk about that for another day. I want to get back to Texas being hypocrites and the fact that they are seriously trying to tell other people how to run things when they got all these problems. Y'all had storms like rain falling from the sky, which is going to happen periodically, and hundreds of people die in your storms because your Republican leadership is so terrible at maintaining your infrastructure. Your leaders are trying to focus your attention on woke issues, but if you listen to people like James Tallarico, and Jonah, please get this clip ready. James Tallarico, who was asked about, he's a Texas representative, and he's running for, I believe, Senate in that state. And he is constantly being asked, now that he has declared his intention to run for U.S. Senate, he's always being asked about the issues that the people in Texas want you to focus on. The leadership in Texas want you to focus on the woke. They want you to focus on trans issues. They want you to focus on a whole lot of things that have nothing to do with the fact that y'all don't have an infrastructure grid that's going to last any amount of time once these AI data centers are completely up to speed. They don't want you to talk about the fact that your support for your storm system is in the trash. They don't want you to talk about any of those things. They want you to talk about trans people. I want you all to take a listen to James Tallarico, and this is again about Texas and Chicago. You don't have that clip? I have. Chicago mayor. No, it's James Tallarico, who is the white guy who is running for office. Hold on, y'all. We're doing this in real time. I'm going to put this in the chat, Jonah, because I really want this clip, because I need the people to be able to understand what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the bureaucracy. I just dropped that into the chat. Let me know when you have that. Well, anyway, and while Jonah is pulling that up, what we have is a situation where representatives like James Tallarico are having to basically affirm for their membership that the things that people are trying to get you all to focus on are not the things that you should be focusing on. Do you have that clip now? We're doing this in real time, y'all. So y'all got that. We're short of person. So you have the clip now. All right, Jonah's got the clip now. We're going to play the clip now, because I really want y'all to see what it is Texas should be focusing on, but really isn't focusing on. And James Tallarico does this really, really well. Jonah, are we ready? Awesome. Let's go. Let's play.
For 5 days, and I've had a lot of interviews with national media. No one's ever asked me about the cost of housing. No one's asked me about the cost of prescription drugs. No one's asked me about the cost of childcare. The only thing the media wants to ask me about are trans athletes. And so what I would say is that the only minority destroying this country is the billionaires. Trans people are 1% of the population. Undocumented people are 1% of the population. Muslims are 1% of the population. We are all focused on the wrong 1%. Trans people aren't taking away our health care. Undocumented people aren't defunding our schools. Muslims aren't cutting taxes for themselves and their rich friends.
Come on.
It's the billionaires and their puppet politicians. And so we need not only the media, but all of us to focus on the real problem at hand.
So you see why this matters, right? Because while Texas is going around declaring that they have the answers for Chicago, y'all literally got so much happening in your own backyard. You got a whole ass tree growing out your eye. You trying to tell Chicago how they should navigate, how they should move. Now, Mayor Brandon Scott of Chicago has had some things to say because, as you may recall, part of the reason we're talking about this is because Texas has sent its National Guard's troops into Chicago, basically trying to, from a position of real deficiency, right? Like you sent National Guard's troops past all of the devastated parts of Texas that are still reeling from the storm damage. You sent them past all of that to go tell the woke Democrats in Chicago how they supposed to handle their business. Now, Jonah, if you could please pull the clip of Mayor Brandon Scott. Looks like we've got that. Let's take a listen to what Mayor Brandon Scott is from Baltimore. Mayor Brandon Johnson is from Chicago. Something about that name, I suppose. Let's take a listen to what the mayor of Chicago had to say about Texas trying to show up.
And Governor Abbott said last night that the role of his National Guard troops will be to, quote, safeguard ICE officials and other federal officials as they try to enforce the law. Is that what your intel says too?
The governor of Texas should be worrying about Texas.
Come on.
Why he all up in my business?
That's what I'm saying.
Focus on Texas. The minimum wage in Texas is $7.25. The life expectancy in Texas is lower than Chicago. The governor of Texas spent $200 million that should be going towards raising the minimum wage in Texas, that should be going towards making sure that life expectancy is not cut off. $200 million to bus migrants to cities across America. He dealt with a storm where 700 people died. Whatever his understanding is, clearly he doesn't understand how to make sure that workers have a livable wage. He doesn't understand how to make sure that life expectancy is not cut off because you're poor. He certainly does not understand how to deal with a crisis where 700 people died in a storm. $200 million of Texan tax dollars that went towards busing migrants across this country.
So what the mayor there is saying is handle your shit. Like, why are you spending resources that you clearly could be redeploying in other more effective ways? Why are you deploying those resources at us? We got a life expectancy that exceeds yours. We ain't got hundreds of people dying in storms. We are doing what's necessary to make sure our woke agenda is empowering our people. Why don't y'all stay asleep in Texas? And the challenge that we have here is that this is sort of a policy that we're seeing spreading throughout Republican-led states. And that's going to matter because y'all's president is now trying to claim plenary power, which we're going to get to in just a minute. But the other reason why this matters is because what the Republican states are doing is basically, it is a soft invasion. They are sending troops from Republican states into Democrat states, despite the fact that the governors don't want it, the mayors of the cities don't want it, all to defend federal buildings. And in Chicago, the amount of it is one city block of protesters at this federal building. One city block of protesters that has now ushered in a wave of militarization as it pertains to increased police presence and increased militarization that our people are going to have to navigate through Chicago. Now, the challenge that we're also facing is because the president is now planning to invoke the Insurrection Act. Now, under ordinary circumstances, and this is there's a great article by the Brennan Center that talks all about the Insurrection Act. Jonah, I'm going to put that in the Zoom chat so that you can share it with the good people in the YouTube, and I will share it with Nubia in just a second. There's a wonderful article by the Brennan Center, which is a really great organization, Brennan Center for Justice. Shout out to them. And it's called the Insurrection Act Explained. And they talk about in the Insurrection Act, we have a few sets of laws that limit what it is the president can do when it comes to using the military as against its own people. We've all heard before about the Posse Comitatus Act, and that's basically an act that forbids the United States military, whether it's federal armed forces or National Guards troops, to basically take part in civilian law enforcement. But we right now have National Guards troops who are basically taking force in civilian law enforcement. And again, even though this is something the Republicans are doing a lot, I also got to look at here at New York, where Governor Kathy Hochul and Mayor Eric Adams also brought National Guards troops into the subways, even though they weren't armed and could not engage in arrest. But they did it because psychologically it was going to make New Yorkers feel better. And when I said that was a stupid idea back then and it was going to lead to all of these sorts of unintended consequences, these are the unintended consequences. Because when you're using your military as a prop to basically fill in a function for public safety because you refuse to actually invest in public safety, you get bullshit decisions like this. Basically, we have a situation where in this country, there is an American tradition that will view militarized interference in civilian government as something that is a direct threat to like freedom and liberty. And so invoking the Insurrection Act would basically suspend the posse comitatus rule. And it would allow the president to then take the military, which under ordinary circumstances he cannot do, but to take the military and then aim it in the direction of civilian law enforcement. And according to the report, and hold on, actually, you know what? Let me pull up the Brennan Center's article because y'all gonna see this because y'all know I like y'all to see what it is that we talking about. In fact, so YouTube, I'm going to share my screen because we like receipts. This is the Brennan Center's article, and it says, when can the president invoke the Insurrection Act? Troops can be deployed under 3 sections of the Insurrection Act, and each of them is designed for a different set of situations. Section 251 will allow the president to deploy troops if the state legislature requests federal aid. This is something that you might see, say, when they were putting down the LA rebellion, right? I'm not going to call it a riot because it wasn't a riot. It was a rebellion. Y'all was beating black people's ass, and black people said, fuck that, we're not doing it no more. While Section 251, as you see here, requires state consent because in that case, the governor of the state had to request it. Sections 252 and 253 will allow the president to deploy troops without a request, even if it's against the state's wishes. Section 252, as you can see here in the text, will permit deployment in order to enforce the laws of the United States or suppress rebellion whenever unlawful obstructions, combinations, or assemblages or rebellion make it impracticable to enforce federal law in that state. What the hell does that mean? It don't mean what Donald Trump wants y'all to think it means. It basically means if there was a whole ass rebellion, then they would be able to bring troops in and shut down the rebellion. Section 253 is the next section. It's got 2 parts. The first part would allow the president to use the military in a state to suppress any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy. So like when we had January the 6th, had the Republicans not worked to prevent the deployment of troops, you might have seen a different outcome. You certainly would have seen a different outcome had they been black people at January the 6th. But the second part of Section 253 will allow the president to deploy troops to suppress, again, any insurrection, domestic violence, unlawful combination, or conspiracy in a state. And it goes on to provide the language. But the language is so bafflingly broad, as it says here in the article. The language is so bafflingly broad that it cannot possibly mean what it says, or it otherwise authorizes the president to use the military against any 2 people who are conspiring to break federal law. This is one of the reasons why the Brennan Center put this article out years ago and called for reform to the Insurrection Act, because if you don't reform the Insurrection Act and you have somebody like Donald Trump in office, you can basically have a president who's going to do whatever the hell he wants to do. Now, why does this matter? And why is this related to what's happening in Chicago and to the resistance that's being mounted, the resistance like the No Kings protest that's coming up on October 18th? It matters because Donald Trump has gone from claiming that he might invoke the Insurrection Act to claiming that he will invoke and claim plenary power. Now, plenary power is not something that actually exists in the way that they are claiming it. And you guys may have seen some of the video footage of Stephen Miller, who is the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. And he's the one who looks like Pinky in the Brain, but you know what I mean. You know what I mean. I'm sorry to Pinky in the Brain. Y'all should not be catching strays. But basically, he gives that sort of energy. And in an interview on CNN over this week, he basically stopped himself short. Now, some people say he glitched. He stopped talking. Because for those of us who saw the video, he's sitting there talking to the reporter. He's saying President Trump has plenary authority, plenary power. And then he just stops. And I don't know if he thought he was going to invoke the Mitch McConnell glitch where like he just stops and like everybody's like, oh my God, is there a medical incident? And I think he thought that perhaps he was going to be able to claim that there was a glitch in the audio, but we saw him still moving and blinking. So we know he didn't stop because of some technological advancement. We know he just stopped himself from conversation, but he was basically staying in that moment that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, is able to claim plenary power. Plenary authority basically gives a single government official absolute power over anything that is within the purview of that singular government official. He's claiming kingdom. He's claiming Kingdom. Why does this matter as it pertains to Chicago? When you are claiming complete power over a particular area with no limitations, as Cornell Law School defines plenary power, this matters because we got to think about the ways that Donald Trump has been moving internationally in some real tragic moments. Have you all seen any of this video footage of the Venezuelan boats that have been off on the coast of Venezuela and basically end up getting shot down? Jonah, do we have that clip? I want you all to take a listen to this clip and watch the video, because what's basically happening is the United States has been using its weapons and its military power to drone bomb people on boats in the Caribbean, and basically after that fact claim that those people were drug cartel members, but they don't never have any evidence. They just unalive these people and then say, oh yeah, we did it because they were part of a drug cartel. Watch this video, take a listen to this clip, and then we'll unpack it on the other side.
Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth announcing yesterday on social media that the U.S. military struck a boat that the U.S. claims was carrying a substantial amount of drugs without providing evidence. They claim it was headed to America. The strike killed 4 individuals on board. Now, in the last month, the U.S. military has struck 4 boats that U.S. intelligence says had drugs and cartel members aboard, killing at least 21 people. The Trump administration recently notified Congress that members of these drug cartels are unlawful combatants, that their actions constitute an attack on America, and that essentially the U.S. is now at war with them. But some experts have expressed concern about how the White House is changing the rules of war without congressional approval.
Some White House experts are concerned. Everybody in the world should be concerned when you have somebody who's got as much militarized operative power as does this president. Everybody should be concerned about what it means because of what Pam Bondi said just this week. Now, you may recall, and as you can see from those videos, this is not the first. There were like several ships that have boats that have been bombed from the sky with claims thereafter that these were people who were part of drug cartels. But when the people on the ground do the investigating, what we're finding out is that these were mommies and poppies. These were fishing people. These were people who were going out on the water to bring home a load of fish so that they could help feed their families. And now there is a mounting level of international cry about this. But what we should also be concerned about is, remember that national security memo that I told you all about, NSPM 7? And it's the one that basically says if you act in any way that makes the Trump administration think that you're woke or trying to be woke and you ain't asleep, that they gonna be able to come for you. I want you to take a listen to Pam Bondi, because in this clip, Pam Bondi is sitting here with Donald Trump, and this is at their Antifa domestic terrorism conversation. Keep in mind, Antifa is not actually an organization. Antifa is short for anti-fascists. It's for people who are against fascism. I want you all to take a listen to what Pam Bondi says here. In light of what we are aware as to what's happening as it pertains to how Republicans are invading Democratic-led states and how the United States is bombing people from the sky, no questions asked, and talk to me later, and you better talk to me nice or I'm going to have nothing to say. Compare that to what Pamela Bondi had to say at the Antifa counterterrorism, whatever BS conversation they pulled together at the White House yesterday. I'm sharing a video. I want you all to take a listen. Let's go.
We're not going to stop at just arresting the violent criminals we can see in the streets. Fighting crime is more than just getting the bad guy off the streets. It's breaking down the organization brick by brick. Just like we did with cartels, we're going to take the same approach, President Trump, with Antifa. Destroy the entire organization from top to bottom. We're going to take them apart. Thanks to your bold leadership and the designation of Antifa as a terrorist organization, which is exactly what they are, Americans will no longer tolerate their unhinged violence. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pam.
So you get why I'm concerned? Hopefully you understand what the concerns are. Yeah, so we got some things we got to figure out. But I also want to, I would be remiss if I didn't point this part out. Back in the 80s, there was a black family, and they often went by the last name Africa, right? And this was a black family that was minding a black ass business. They were like a environmentally concerned group of people. They were, and by family, I mean extended family. And they were a group of folks who were, definitely anti-police violence, but they were like, basically, we want to to just grow our food. We want to have our chickens, and we want to, even though we're having chickens in the middle of Philadelphia, in the urban space, basically they were like, just leave us alone. We good. We don't, we're not going to bother nobody. But they were constantly in battles with the police. And I remember in 1985 learning about the fact that this community, this black family, extended family, had been bombed from the sky. By American military operatives. I don't know if it was necessarily the police department. I can't quite call. And actually, if you search for MOVE, MOVE, it's the MOVE movement. And the MOVE bombing is what you should be researching in order to get the history of this. But West Philadelphia has this collaborative history page, and they talk about the fact that on May 13th, 1985, after years of nuisance complaints from MOVE's Osage Avenue neighbors, a confrontation between MOVE and the Philadelphia police ended in arguably the most traumatizing event in Philadelphia's history. In 1982, and they talk about the fact that this family moved into this row house, and which is so weird to be talking about complaining about black people growing chickens and food and whatnot, because I got a whole bunch of white people in Bedford-Stuyvesant who own these brownstones who got a whole lot of chickens. And it's just weird how things change. It's weird how things change. But this was an organization that did also concern itself with questions of self-defense, because basically they were trying to engage in living their black lives. Now, you can debate about, whether or not they were annoying to their neighbors, but I don't think anyone should be debating about the fact that there's no reason that an entire city block should have been bombed from the sky because black people were trying to live independent lives. But when you compare histories like that, when you think about Black Wall Street and the fact that this country has a full history of bombing communities from the sky that it does not like. Black Wall Street, they got bombed from the sky with the same militarized weapons that had been used in the First World War. So when you think about the fact that this country has a history of bombing black people, and now we're in a moment where I'm seeing white pastors at protests in Chicago getting shot in the head, literally with these non-lethal rubber ass type bullets, so much so that you can see the smoke rising from their hair. They got their whole ass, what is it called? The Reverend's collar on. When I see that happening, and when I see the increased militarization, and when I also am clear that there is a exponentially growing level of resistance, what I'm reminded of is that America, we in danger, girl. But it ain't new danger. It's the same type of danger that Americans were perfectly willing to tolerate, so long as that danger was being executed and I'm using executed intentionally, as against black people. Now that them chickens are roosting broadly throughout the Americana, right? We're seeing protesters, white women protesters getting beat up by strange men in masks. We're seeing white men getting their asses handed to them. And we're seeing people like Kristi Noem go to places like Portland where they want to say is war ravaged, and ain't no war ravaged in Portland. I don't know what crazy information y'all are feeding Grandpa in the Oval Office, but y'all need to stop recycling footage from years ago when there actually were far more engaging protests in the cities of Portland. But we're in a situation right now where everything that's been done to black people look like it's being done to America. And so I'm going to give you the Sealy feeling, America. I got to hold my fingers just so. And if you know, you know. America, until you do right by black people, everything you think about gonna fail. Until you do right, because everything America dealing with right now was first tested out as against black people. Until you do right, everything you think about is gonna crumble. 866-801-8255, 866-801-TALK is the number. We're going to leave it there. Urban View, elders, what do we young bloods need to know about how to navigate this moment? What do we not understand about the realities of violent white nationalism that you all have memories of? Those are the questions we need to hear from you on today. YouTube, we appreciate y'all. It's good to be back in the studio.